They realized that they were naked. Genesis chapter 3, the fall. In brief passage, Genesis chapter 3. Theme, original sin. Setting, primeval method. The Garden of Eden during the time covered by the first 11 chapters of Genesis. Key figures, serpent. In Christianity, the embodiment of Satan, the arch enemy of God. Adam, the first man created by God in his own image on the sixth day of creation. Eve, the first woman created as Adam's companion, with whom he would populate the earth. In the third chapter of Genesis, Adam and Eve's disobedience, punishment, and alienation from God paved the way for the emergence of evil, bringing suffering, discord, and death into a sinless world. Until then, Adam and Eve live and work in paradise, enjoying a close relationship with each other and with God. They are forbidden only one thing: fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which grows in the center of the garden. Eating this warns God will result in death. He gives no reason or detail for his command, but Adam obeys and avoids it. The serpent, identified in chapter 3, verse 1, as an extremely crafty animal that questions God's motives in prescribing the fruit. It slyly implies that God is deliberately withholding something desirable, the means by which Adam and Eve can obtain wisdom and be like God. Eve needs no persuasion. The fruit looks good, and she is tempted. So she eats it and gives some to Adam. Immediately, Adam and Eve see that they're naked. Ashamed, they sew fig leaves together to cover themselves and hide. Later, Adam admits eating the fruit, but blames Eve. She gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate it. Verse 12. Eve passes on responsibility too. The snake deceived me, and I ate. Verse 13. God's punishments are swift and severe. He condemns the serpent to crawl and eat dust for the rest of his life. Eve is told she will suffer excruciating pain in childbirth and be ruled by her husband. Cursing the ground from which Adam was made, God tells Adam he must forever toil before he can eat. Finally, God expels Adam from the garden. Eve leaves with him and places cherubim, angelic hybrid creatures, and a flaming sword on the east side of Eden to keep them out. For God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Verse 5. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground. Verse 19. The creation of death. It soon becomes clear that there is a price for gaining wisdom. Pain, toil, scarcity, fear, and suffering. Denied access to fruit from the tree of life, humans are now mortal and will die. As God informs Adam, for dust you are, and to dust you will return. Verse 19. Cast adrift, humankind is now in constant danger from the evil within themselves and from others. The serpent's role. No one knows why the crafty serpent is chosen to tempt Eve into disobedience. Unlike most animals in the Bible, it is able to talk, implying that it's more intelligent than other animals. Whispering into Eve's ear in verse 5, chapter 3 of Genesis, it causes her to doubt God. The Genesis account does not mention Satan, although the wily serpent is seen within Christianity, but not Judaism, as the devil or his mouthpiece. Satan is later specifically alluded to in Revelation chapter 20, verse 2, as that ancient snake who is the devil or Satan. Snakes are not always represented as evil entities in the Bible. They are also seen as strong, courageous creatures. For example, in the book of Exodus, chapter 4, verse 3, Moses' staff turns into a snake on his command, and God asks him to make a statue of the serpent with the power to heal snake bites. Chapter 1, verse 8 of the book of Numbers. Humankind and free will. In Christian thought, a sinful act is a deliberate action, attitude, or thought against God. This includes things that are done but should not be, sins of commission, and those that are not done but should be, sins of omission. The fact that all choices are open to sin takes humankind down a path of perpetual wrongdoing, frequently referred to in the Bible as slavery. For Christians, the exercise of free will is central to the story of the fall. Adam and Eve's actions show that human beings have the freedom to make poor choices, but there is a price to pay. Up to this point, Adam and Eve have chosen to obey God, in the face of temptation to make unwise choices that have catastrophic results. God insists that the couple face up to what they have done. With every exercise of free will comes a consequence, desirable or not, for which responsibility must be taken. Theologians have long been occupied by the matter of theological fatalism, or the incompatibility between the concepts of free will and God's omniscience. If people can choose, how can God foresee their choices? Judaism accepts this as a paradox beyond human understanding, believing that God exists outside of time. His knowledge of the past, present, and future does not interfere with free will. Some Christians reconcile this conundrum by believing that God limits his omniscience to preserve humankind's dignity and freedom. Judaism and sin. The doctrine of original sin became a central tenet of Christianity, but this concept was rejected by Judaism. Instead, Jews believe that we are born pure rather than tainted by the sins of our ancestors. They think Adam is not to blame for the wrongdoing of his descendants. We commit sin, but we are not perfect because we are not perfect beings. We must accept that we all transgress at some point in our lives. Because we have free will, we are naturally frail and likely to give way to our sinful inclinations. Not all sins are committed deliberately, but those that are will be punished either here on earth or later after death. The many Old Testament stories concerning the nation of Israel and its sins look at the nature of human beings, the meaning of sin, and the potential for the forgiveness of said sins. Original sin. According to Christian doctrine, the consequences of Adam and Eve's disobedience is that all humans are born sinful, with an inborn tendency to succumb to the temptation and disobey God. While God is blameless, people are damned, deserve to suffer, and require salvation. Known as original sin, this doctrine was set out by Paul the Apostle. In the book of Romans, chapter 5, verse 12, sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin. And so death spread to all men because all sinned. In the 5th century, St. Augustine, born in 354, died in 430 AD, developed Paul's doctrine further, saying that spiritual weakness was inherited via concupiscence or sexual intercourse, which deprives people of self-control. The Augustinian view of original sin was formally adopted by the Roman Catholic Church during the 16th century. The doctrine was also popular among Protestant reformers such as Martin Luther and John Calvin. They equated it with perpetual human longing for fleshly pursuits that persist even after baptism. Rebirth and the washing away of hereditary sin. Calvin went further, rejecting the concept of free will in favor of predestination, the idea that all events are willed by God. Both Judaism and Islam reject the idea of original sin. According to the Quran, Adam and Eve are equally responsible for the fall. After their expulsion from the Garden of Eden, they are forgiven by God and become his representatives on earth. The wages of sin. Original sin helps to explain why God allows innocent people to suffer. Personal innocence is no immunity against God's wrath. Everyone is a sinner, and eventually by choice. All have sinned and come short of the glory of God, says the book of Romans chapter 3, verse 23. Christian doctrine maintains that because of humankind's original sin, every person is born separated from God. And Paul states in the book of Romans chapter 6, verse 23, that the wages of sin are death. He is referring to Adam's original sin and death as a condemnation by and separation from God rather than a physical death. The inability to have a relationship with God is inscribed in the book of Ephesians chapter 2 verse 1 as a form of spiritual death. You were dead in your transgressions and sins. For Christians, it is only through faith in Jesus Christ, who was sent by God to die for humankind's sins, that someone can be born again and reawakened spiritually. This is a central theme of redemption, the act of cleansing away original sin. Redemption is achieved by receiving God's grace through baptism and accepting that Jesus Christ died for the sins that enslave humankind. In his letter to the Galatians, chapter 5, verse 1, Paul proclaims, "It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery." Christians sometimes refer to Christ as the second Adam. The First, Adam sins and causes the fall of humanity. The second dies and redeems humanity. Nor can the apostle mean that Eve only sinned, for if Adam sinned willfully and knowingly, he became the greater transgressor. Mary Astor, born in 1666 died 1731, English feminist. Blame falls on Eve. Christianity has traditionally blamed Eve and all womankind for the fall from God's grace and seen her as degenerate, morally weak, and subordinate to man. Paul contributed to this view. In the first book of Timothy, chapter 2, verse 14, he absolves Adam and blames Eve, saying Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor. Many medieval theologians echoed Paul's views, and Christian art reinforced this interpretation. Michelangelo's fresco of the Fall, circa 1510, in the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican City shows a serpent with the upper body and long blonde hair of a woman, an image that was prevalent during the Renaissance. However, the book of Genesis, does not attribute blame for the fall. On the contrary, it indicates that Adam is present when the serpent speaks to Eve and receives equal punishment, suggesting that they are both culpable.